Andrea, thank you for joining me this afternoon. What do you make of Sir Mark's comments?
I mean, look, I understand exactly where he's coming from. We're 2 weeks before the spending review, and I think it goes to show how sort of desperate criminal justice segments of the criminal justice system are for funding from that spending review, that you've got 6 police chiefs putting that case publicly, because undoubtedly the police do have huge amounts of burdens upon them, and do need funding for that. So I completely understand that. And he's right, probation isn't going to always do a perfect job. So there will be people who reoffend when they come out of prison on early release. But equally, we have already pretty high rates of reoffending from people who are coming out of prison in our current release scheme. So, I mean, we really need to think about the fact that everybody in prison except for about 65 people are coming out. So
I totally get that, Andrea, but I mean, certainly if you keep people in prison for longer, they're not going to be able to commit crimes. That's a pretty fundamental part of this, isn't it?
I mean, that only works for as long as the person is in prison.
Yes, but if you're letting them out early, that increases the amount of time that they have to commit crimes.
I mean, I think, well, there are two different things. One is the early release scheme we currently have, this SDS 40 as it's called. So that's the footage your viewers are seeing now. That's the people being currently released. The plans that Mark Rowley's talking about are the plans in the sentencing review, which will see people on many standard determinant sentences, spending 30% of their time, but then spending 30% of their time in prison, then 30% of their time in the community under intensive supervision. So having curfews, tags, being forced to do unpaid work, all of those kind of alternatives.
But is there evidence that the probation service can actually intensively look after those people and monitor them and make sure that they're not committing crimes? Because if you're a victim of crime and you see a sentence for someone and you think, well, they're actually only going to serve 30% of that behind bars in prison in the traditional way that people think a sentence is served, that is something that is going to cause a lot of distress, anxiety and annoyance to a lot of people, especially when they've gone through a very, very difficult time in regard to the criminal justice system.
I mean, there's no question that there will be victims of crime who are disappointed by early release in this way. I mean, to the government's credit, they are being clear, they're being transparent about what parts of what people's sentences they will be spending in prison. In a way, I don't think members of the public, frankly, when SDS 40 came into effect, when I would do shows like this, people were questioning, they didn't realise that at the moment people get out 50%. Well, previously got out 50%. So I think there has been a move towards more truth with the public, which can only be a positive thing.
But the truth is, it's positive. It's positive, perhaps, that the truth is there, and the government and the Ministry of Justice and the probation service and the prison service is being transparent, and that's good. But it doesn't make it any better for people who want people locked up for longer. There are many problems in the prison system. I'm not saying there aren't, but the fact is that if you commit a crime, you should do at least some time. And my argument would be...
Well, everybody already is doing time, Peter. Like, in this country, they do a lot more time than they do in Scotland or Northern Ireland or anywhere else in Western Europe. We already have longer sentences for every offence than anywhere else in this country.
But if you're only serving 30% of that sentence, well, it's 30% of a longer sentence. But if you're a victim of crime, you want someone sent away for the whole time, presumably. Many people do anyway.
I mean, I think most people who are victims of crime, and having been one and worked with them for years, most of them want it to not happen to anybody else. So you need to look not at what sounds tough, but at what is effective. And if you want to drive criminality and drive reoffending and drive making people victims of crime, then put people in prison. I mean, prison is the least effective solution we have for crime prevention. Much better that money and resources spent on probation. I mean, you asked me before...
Is it not more straightforward and more honest to say that prison is the least effective thing for longer term reoffending? When someone's in prison, they can usually not commit crime.
No, I mean... Quite the opposite is true. I mean, the people who've got the lowest rates of reoffending are frankly those people who are in prison on really long sentences. So people who commit sexual offences and murder tend to have by far the lowest rates of reoffending. It's people who have their lives disrupted through prison, in and out through the gate, who have amongst the highest rates of reoffending. I mean, you asked about probation and whether probation is ready. I think there's a real question there about what support there's going to be for probation, because every one of these people who is not serving is coming out after their 30% is going under the supervision of probation. And I know that 700 million, I think, has been committed by Treasury in the spending review to electronic monitoring and support for probation. Government's announced increases in numbers of probation officers, but that's not really enough given the retrenchment of support to probation over the last 14 years. So I think there's a real struggle. When I meet probation officials, they are professionals. They are already feeling the strain.
So do you disagree then? Do you disagree then with Sir Mark Rowley and these other people, such as the Deputy Director of MI5, the Director General of the National Crime Agency, when they say or they argue that these people out on the streets, in whatever capacity that is, whether they're under supervision orders or not, the fact is they're not behind bars. They're saying that this is a greater risk to society. Do you agree with that as a general principle?
Obviously, not like when you let more people out, there are going to be some of those people who then reoffend and will then require the services of the police. And that's why the police chiefs are making this plea for more funding. I mean, it's sort of one of their arguments for trying to get more funding is that they're dealing with more protesters, they're dealing with problems in Gaza, they're dealing with people who are going to be early released. It's one of their many arguments they're making, quite publicly, I have to say, for a kind of favourable response in the spending review. And I understand why they would be wanting to do that. But if you can move to a system of using prison for those people who need to be in prison for a period of time and then moving them to the community where we know that people have lower rates of reoffending when they're under the support of probation than if they spend a longer time in prison and then come out, then that's ultimately better for the public and for public protection. That means there'll be fewer victims of crime, which is what you and I both want.
Thank you, Andrea. That's Andrea Coomber there, case